this is working. Hello, hello, hello. I'll tell y'all this now. Ever since daylight savings happened, everything feels a lot of things. I can't really say everything, but a lot of things feel a bit off and delayed. So I haven't really became accustomed to it, but I'm going to imagine and hope that everything goes right here. So I do need to check to see if the volume is working. And I believe that it is, and we're here for another retro review number 7. We're not reviewing another WWE show this week. We're not reviewing another AEW show this week. This time around, we're dwelling into the world of TNA, which the show I'm reviewing around this time period is referred to as Impact/Impact Wrestling. I'll go ahead and give a warning. It's not the biggest deal. I'm more than likely will refer to it as TNA because that was kind of always the case to what I referred to that company as. But this time around, we are reviewing Impact Redemption 2018. We had a lot of choices, obviously, because we've never reviewed a TNA show on this channel and in this retro review series. But we had a lot of choices in shows to pick from. And I will admit that this was one of my top choices because this solidified and was the start of a new era for this company. A new regime had taken place, and the show name being Redemption kind of meant a lot and played a lot into that as well. But before we get into this review, we do have a bit of a preview, background story, and whatnot to go through. Before we get into that as well, I was a little conflicted. Did I want to stream WWE 2K24 while doing this review or Fight Forever, which just Fight Forever is a lot easier to maintain, but I was going back and forth on it because there's a lot of talent that was on and competed on this show that is actually in that game as well, but I settled on Fight Forever, so I did want to at least acknowledge that. So let's get through this background for this event, my history with watching TNA, and then we'll get into the show review. So I won't go completely into my history of watching TNA because I had kind of always watched TNA on and off. With this time period for the company, again, was a transition period. A new regime had came in with Scott D'Amore and Don Callis taking place. But I had stopped watching around in the beginning of 2016. And that is because I did not have the Pop channel and didn't want to have to go out of my way to watch the weekly show. So 2016-17 era of Impact, I'm not completely familiar with or have watched a lot of it. But I will say, and this could be said about a lot of years in TNA history, but 2017 was a hellacious year for the company, and there's a lot of things that I could talk about, but I'm going to settle on a few. Not a lot, not all of them, but a few. Thing one of the main things, the Broken Hardys, which I think a lot of people were watching TNA due to them. Matt and Jeff, Broken, Matt Hardy, and Brother Nero were taking over this company. It was the main thing to watch in this company, in a very public dispute and contract reasons and booking reasons got in the way of that, and the Hardys eventually we could have imagined they weren't going to stay in TNA forever, which in the big 2025, that's weird to say because that's where they are now and are the current tag champions, but we kind of saw that they weren't going to stay there forever, but it was just the way that it ended and how public, and it was just a dispute, did not give a good look to the company. And it did not help that the Hardys would have a very brief run in ROH, but very popular. They had great matches with the Young Bucks, so much so that this run was so popular that ROH/AEW would make figures commemorating it 8 years later. And then obviously the big return to WWE would take place, but that is one of the main things. Another thing that happened, which is another public dispute that just ended up being terrible and not working at all, is this GFW merger where the two companies were supposed to merge and be under the GFW banner, and the show would be Impact, so it would very much be like if I was going to make a terrible comparison, but it's like if ECW and WCW merged, and the company name would be ECW, but like all of everything that you see would be WCW related stuff, which technically that happened with the Alliance, which is funny in hindsight. But regardless, this merger did not last long. It another public thing with Jeff Jarrett, and it just ended up being a big split and not mattering at all. But it airing out in the public failed. Now, this is one of the main things that I hated about TNA during this time period was a man named Alberto El Patron. I've probably said it in a handful of my videos already, but I feel that this is probably the biggest place to highlight it. But I am not a big Alberto El Patron fan. I met him back in the day at an ROH show, which I feel a lot of people probably like, he was an ROH, he was there for a cup of coffee. But I met him at an ROH show, and he was a bit of an asshole. Granted, I'm not the nicest human being ever, but there's not many stories that come out about me being an asshole with Alberto. It was always the case, but I just did not enjoy seeing him in Impact. And when he came to Impact, he was the, in quotation, big star, got the GFW title, and then when they did this merger and had title for title match, he beat Bobby Lashley, which I was a little bit salty about with that. And then he had a public falling out in dispute with the company that they would have to let him go. And he would have to vacate this title. And Eli Drake, a.k.a. LA Knight, would win this title. It's a very messy time period in this company, but long story short, Alberto quickly comes back, and this is what I'll say. I remember specifically Bound for Glory 2017. I'm like, okay, this is the big show of the year. I'm going to hope that it's a good show. I imagine it's going to be a good show. And OSW Review, shout out to them, have reviewed that show. And so I've kind of watched that review back several times. So I watched the show live at the time and then watched their review of it. And the show was okay, but I absolutely hated the ending. This is the big show of the year. You should have a happy ending or at least a good ending. And it ended with Alberto costing Johnny Impact, who I thought was going to win the title. He didn't. But he cost him the title, and Eli Drake would retain. And there's a lot more, like I said, that I can get into. And there's some more that I will have to get into because it plays a big factor into the main event of the show and everything else. But we're finally here for the show review. Like I said, it's redemption, new era in TNA/Impact, and a bit of a small part, I can't really say small, but a brief partnership would happen with Impact and Lucha Underground, which, again, something that plays a big factor in the main event of this show is Lucha Underground, and it plays a factor in the opening contest, because our opening contest, I knew there was one more thing I had to say. Sorry, I had it on the wrong notepad, but I don't think they would imagine this, but this would end up being the last TNA pay-per-view to take place at the Impact Zone in Universal Studios in Orlando, which I did fact-check this and went through, unless Wikipedia's wrong, which Wikipedia might not be the most reliable source, but I went through every freaking pay-per-view since then, and they did not have this show listed. And I kind of realized it once this show had kicked off. I'm like, it has been a minute since we have seen this location, for TNA at least, because ROH was there for a hot minute. But this will be the last TNA pay-per-view to happen in the Impact Zone. Let's put it that way. And they would only do a couple more Impact tapings there. So the new regime, a highlight of theirs, I guess you could say, is traveling and having traveling shows, and different audiences and locations were used for them. So good on them, and kudos to them. But back to this Lucha Underground partnership. They had a big Lucha Underground versus Impact show WrestleMania weekend, which, again, I hate that I keep dwelling on it, but we'll talk more about that once we get to this main event matchup. But our opening contest was a matchup presented by Lucha Underground, Drago versus Aerostar. I'm sorry that y'all been looking at Penta and Fenix for the last 5-ish minutes, but y'all finally get to see some action. as well. But if y'all want to travel back to 2018, June 13th will be when Season 4 of Lucha Underground premieres. But our opening contest, like I said, is Drago versus Aerostar. A tie-up starts this match off, followed by kick attempts by both men. Aerostar hits a twisting crossbody off of the top rope, followed by a dive to the outside. Once back of the ring, Drago delivers a super kick and another dive to the outside. Aerostar hits a springboard to the outside, and it was very coffin drop-esque. Then we get a top rope DDT that gets a 2 count for Drago. Aerostar hits a tope to the outside with several pin attempts by both happening afterwards. Then Aerostar slips on back-to-back springboard attempts, but the last one he was able to land a code breaker off of and pick up the victory. So, good opening match with, it felt more like they were doing spots than actually wrestling, which I hate to think that way and say that, but that's kind of how I felt this was, and it was a good match though. Nothing to complain about. Now we have a lot of backstage segments to discuss right here. First one, Josh Matthews, who was the commentator, one of the commentators, the other one was Don Callis at the time, had a partnership with Matt Sydal where they were very influential and peaceful people. That's the best way I could really describe it. But Josh Matthews helped Matt Sydal become X Division champion, and they had mutually went their ways, which plays not the biggest factor in the show, but we see earlier in the show, or earlier in the day, that they had mutually went their ways before the show had started. Second thing, which plays into this show. I hate that I keep saying that, but, at least we have stuff building up that plays a factor into things. Feaster Fired, which had been a long-standing tradition in TNA, had happened at the end of 2017 into 2018, and the results of that consisted of EC3, a long-time TNA competitor, was fired, which, if you want to know where the hell he was challenging for the North American title in NXT. Check out my retro review of NXT TakeOver New Orleans, which is hilarious. I completely have already forgotten that happened so quickly. But regardless, EC3 got the fired briefcase. With the other 3 briefcases consisted of Petey Williams getting the X Division briefcase, and he has his title shot later in the show. Eli Drake, who I'm fairly certain I'll call LA Knight during the course of the next couple of minutes, receiving the tag team title shot, and Moose would get the world title shot, but he had lost it to Eli Drake. So Eli Drake had 2 of these Feaster Fired briefcases, and on this show, he will be using his tag team title shot with his tag team partner being Scott Steiner, and they challenge LAX for these tag team titles. So our last backstage segment actually puts a factor into this matchup, and we see LAX in the backstage area, which they had always had cool vignettes and backstage segments around this time period, but they're waiting for Conan to show up, and he still is not. He was very late, and then Santana gets a phone call from King, who tells him that Conan was taken out, and this is the worst time for them to get this news because their matchup is up next. So, King, I don't know when I'll be able to discuss this time period in TNA again, but King is Eddie Kingston. So I will go ahead and point that out. But the thing that matters at this moment is a tag team title match with LAX, Santana and Ortiz versus Eli Drake and Scott Steiner. Drake and Santana start the match with LAX double teaming early on. Steiner and Drake then double team and cheat with the referee's back being turned to them and land a double elbow drop. LAX land a line salt leg drop combo with Steiner breaking up the pinfall attempt. Then, for the first time in 8 years, Scott Steiner hits a Frankensteiner onto Santana. Seconds later, Santana dives onto Scott on the outside while Eli and Ortiz are left alone in the ring, with Eli being able to hit the gravy train to crown new tag team champions, that being Eli Drake and Scott Steiner, which is a bit insane that Scott Steiner was a champion in 2018, but I'm not going to be one to complain about it. So, a very quick matchup between several of my favorite acts from this time period in TNA. Next matchup, we have a lot of competitors and a lot of things that happens in this match. Is a 6-way match consisting of Trevor Lee, Desmond Xavier, Taiji Ishimori, El Hijo del Fantasma, DJZ, and Brian Cage. This is the match that was made. Like, I was realizing, like, I should probably like use WWE 2K24 footage, because Trevor Lee is in that game as Cameron Grimes, Desmond Xavier is in that game as Wesley, El Hijo del Fantasma is in the game as Santos Escobar, and DJZ is in it as Joaquin Wild. So 6 of these competitors were in WWE, with 3 of the 4 still being there. And Brian Cage, who's in this game. Sorry, Taiji Ishimori, but Taiji Ishimori, I'm fairly certain, is like weeks away from becoming the Bone Soldier and joining New Japan as well. But we got a 6-man match right here. DJZ and Xavier start the match off, mainly countering one another's moves. This changes when DJZ dives onto Ishimori and quickly is joined by Fantasma in the ring. Trevor Lee comes in and he tries to keep his opponents grounded and others from coming into the ring, which includes pushing them off the apron. And he tries several times to do this to Brian Cage, who does not budge. And all the competitors are outside of the ring, with Trevor Lee being left alone in the ring with Brian Cage, and he realizes that he is screwed. Cage builds up a dominant performance, including a moonsault onto Ishimori, and then Ishimori lands his own a bit later. Ishimori hits a Death Valley driver that gets a 2 count. Cage slams Xavier and Fantasma at the same time, and then follows this up with a reverse crossbody by Trevor Lee. This is the spot where Trevor Lee, how do I describe it? Trevor Lee runs into him, and they flip with the crossbody landing there, which I believe in PWG he referred to that as the Orange Crush. TNA, I don't think it was called that. Fantasma does a dive to the outside and a Michinoku driver back of the ring that gets a 2 count. Then Everett comes into the ring to hit their specials, with the last one being hit is Cage's drill claw on Xavier to pick up the victory. So Brian Cage would win this matchup. I enjoyed it. A lot happened in it, which was expected. I've not mastered covering multi-man matches outside of the TakeOver New Orleans ladder match, but I did a good job here, I think. Now we have another matchup. This one, not a lot happens, and there's a reason for that. So if I sound very, like, there's not a lot of notes here, there's reason for that. It is Taya Valkyrie versus Kiera Hogan, with Taya acknowledging the side. This match was added last minute or earlier in the day. B, we'll get to in a couple seconds, but Taya acknowledges that there's a size advantage, and Kiera Hogan has to use a speed advantage to her size, or her advantage. And then the debuting Tessa Blanchard joins the commentary team, and this is why this match there's not a lot happening, because a lot of it is focusing on the commentary, which I don't like that. I want to care about what's actually going on in the ring, and I thought they could have did that a little bit better and made this match mean a little bit more. But a lot of this focus is on commentary, and I've kind of tuned a lot of it out, so I ain't really sorry either. So what happens in this match is Taya being very aggressive, including hitting a fallaway slam. Hogan builds a comeback with a senton, and then both reverse one another's finishers until Taya lands the Valhalla, which is the glam slam, to pick up the victory. And I will give credit where credit's due. Taya and Tessa do have a good rivalry in the coming months. So there's that. Now we have another backstage segment. This one involving Petey Williams, who's looking to win the X Division title. This would be his first time holding it in 10 years and 10 days to be exact. He was last champion in 2008. And he says that his chances of winning have drastically gone up since Seidel and Matthews are no longer partner with one another. And then his former partner, his former mentor, Scott Steiner, appears and tells him that his math doesn't really add up because he is Canadian. So I guess that is kind of the case. But Petey Williams is looking to become X Division champion one more time, and he is looking to do that against the then champion Matt Seidel. The X Division title is on the line. Back and forth start with several arm drags and hurricane ranas by Petey. Then Seidel targets the right knee of Petey. Seidel lands a nice spinning kick and then later a standing moonsault that gets a 2 count. We get a code breaker and Russian leg sweep by Petey that gets a 2 count. Petey is able to avoid Seidel's top rope maneuver and then applies a sharpshooter afterwards. Petey lands a code breaker on the apron, and then Petey gets his knees up after Seidel attempts the shooting star press. Then he hits the Canadian Destroyer, but Seidel flies out of the ring, so he cannot pick up the pinfall at that moment. Then Petey gets Seidel back in the ring and near the turnbuckle position, in which he attempts to hit a super Canadian Destroyer, but Seidel pushes him off and attempts another top rope maneuver, but Petey moves out of the way, but he is not able to move out of the way of a Seidel roll-up that gets Seidel the victory and successfully retains the championship. So I'll say this. I have the Petey Williams rule on this channel. It's just mainly me griping, but anytime a Canadian Destroyer is hit in a wrestling match and someone gets a pin but it doesn't end the match, I said there should be $1 to Petey Williams. Now, that doesn't really apply here because A, Petey Williams is in the match, so he can hit the maneuver. And B, the main thing that should happen, Seidel rolled out of the ring. So Petey, it didn't make the move look weak because Petey wasn't able to get the pinfall off of it. So kudos to there. Other than that, it was a good back and forth match. As now, we have another multi-man match. This being a 3-on-3 House of Hardcore match between OVE versus Eddie Edwards, Tommy Dreamer, and Moose. One of the main storylines and memorable moments from around this era of Impact involves Sami Callihan accidentally hitting Eddie Edwards in the face with a baseball bat. If you were not there around this time period, there is a match between the two in which Sami placed a chair on top of it. The chair was unfolded, so it was not the most stable way to have it on there. And he was going to hit the top of the chair, and then that would hit Eddie. But again, it was not the most stable position, and the chair moves out of the way, and the bat hits Eddie in the face, and it is a very bad thing that probably shouldn't have happened, but to TNA, they used it as a storyline in which Sami was not regretful of this happening, and Eddie was looking to get revenge, but he's a wounded man because of this injury that he had suffered. So Sami, again, not regretting what happened, is starting to take out the people that Eddie cares most about, one of which was Moose. And if you remembered, I said earlier, Moose was the then Feast or Fired briefcase holder for the world title shot. He put that up while Eli Drake put up his tag team title shot, and Sami and the other OVE members cost Moose this match, so that's how Eli Drake ended up with both title shots. And Eddie and Moose needed one more man to even up the teams, in which they could have went for Brian Myers, which is their current faction in TNA, 7 years later. But this time around, they go with Tommy Dreamer, who ran the House of Hardcore promotion, so that is why this match is labeled as a House of Hardcore match. Essentially, it is a no-rules hardcore tornado tag match. OV versus Eddie Edwards, Tommy Dreamer, and Moose. Jake Chris tries to do a dive to the outside, but Moose catches him and hits him with a powerbomb on the apron. We get brawling from all parties on the outside, and weapons are involved. Of note was Tommy Dreamer slamming drinks into several people's faces. Eddie delivers a chair shot into a trash can, while Moose dives onto Sami, who is placed on a ladder, but Sami moves out of the way, so Moose lands on the ladder. OVE single out Eddie, who is launched into a cutter onto a pair of chairs. Dreamer hits a Spicoli driver on Sami through a table, and then thumbtacks are placed into the match with Eddie hitting a knee to Dave Christ onto them. Jake hits Moose with a cutter through tables on the outside, which was the biggest spot of this match. And then Sami once again tries to hit Eddie with the bat in the face, but Tommy Dreamer brings in a barbed wire bat with Sami low blowing him and then pinning him afterwards, ending this matchup with Eddie. Is not happy with this at all and snaps and tries to beat the crap out of Sami, which No one's stopping him. Tommy Dreamer was even just on the outside, just standing there. Sammy gets taped to the ropes, in which Eddie is using a kendo stick and other weapons, mainly a kendo stick. The barbed wire bat is used as well, which makes Sammy bleed. And then they're like, "Okay, Eddie, it's time to end it. You got your revenge." And he is not happy with this, and is swinging the kendo stick over and over again. And his wife, Alicia Edwards, comes to the ring, and he did not know it was her, and accidentally hits her, and all the medical attention goes towards her to make sure that she was okay, which she was. I'll say this was a quick match. I will say I would expect there was a lot of big moments and things that happened in this match, but this was a very quick match. So there was that. Like I said, this is one of the big rivalries and storylines that happened in this time period in TNA. I wasn't really the biggest because this kind of turned Eddie Edwards into a hardcore wrestler. He kind of turned into Tommy Dreamer for a bit. And ever since then, he's been kind of a hybrid of Eddie Edwards and a hardcore wrestler, which at the time period, I kind of understood it, but I thought they should have made it more of a temporary, when needed basis, but it kind of felt that the hardcore aspect leaned in a little bit too much. But I've always enjoyed Eddie Edwards, and it's insane that he is still in TNA to this day. He's been in TNA for about 9 years now. Time out. He joined in 2014. No. I'd used the wrong number. He's in TNA for 11 years now, and he has been there longer than AJ Styles was, which I think is an insane fact. But kudos to Eddie, who hopefully ends up in the TNA Hall of Fame one day. We got 2 more matches to go through, both with title implications at stake. The first is a Knockouts title match. Allie versus Su Yung. The Knockouts title at this time period was chaos because Gail Kim would win it, and it was in her retirement match, so she would vacate it. Laurel Vaness, who is known to fans now as Chelsea Green, would become champion and then leave the company, so quickly loses the title. And Allie, who had been in TNA for a hot minute at this time period and a fan favorite, would win the title, and she was avoiding her boyfriend. It's weird because in real life, they are together. I imagine they're still together, but in the sake of this, they were in real life at the time period together, but on screen, they were not, and Braxton Sutter was trying to get back into Allie's life, and Allie did not want this, which makes sense because she got the Knockouts title with you not being there. Get the hell out of my way. And so he tries to get revenge, and a debuting Su Yung comes into play, trying to get the Knockouts title that Allie holds, and Braxton Sutter is trying to join her side to get back at Allie, which is the story of this match, and plays a factor in this match very early as Sutter is on the outside helping Su Yung. The match goes to the outside early as well, with Su Yung doing a flip off of the apron. Then it goes back in the ring where Allie lands a series of clotheslines and elbows. She also lands a super kick, but Sutter distracts the referee from a pinfall happening, and this earns him a slap to the face. Su tries to get advantage, but is caught with a roll-up, and Allie has a successful defense. I kind of wish they would have had a straight-up match here, which they would, because Su Yung would become a knockout champion pretty soon after this. Especially with it being the pay-per-view, you would want it to be treated as a bigger deal, but it's the start of their things going on, so it's somewhat understandable that this is the case. After the match, Braxton Sutter tries to make it up to Su Yung and even proposes to her, in which Su Yung hits him with mist in the face and a mandible claw afterwards. As now it is time for our triple threat world title main event. Which, what is funny is for the past, how long we've been rolling for right now? We've been going for 30 minutes. Jeez. Y'all been seeing this match on and off. This was the main event match of this show. Austin Aries versus Pentagon Jr. versus Fenix, a.k.a. Ray Fenix. The main event originally for this pay-per-view was supposed to be Austin Aries versus Alberto El Patron. And WrestleMania weekend TNA and Lucha Underground would put on a crossover event with the main event of that show scheduled to be Rey Fenix and Alberto El Patron versus Pentagon Jr. and Austin Aries. And earlier in the day, Impact would put on a redemption press conference for this main event match in which Aries and Alberto would get face to face and brawl with one another. But the moment that press conference ended, Alberto was out of there. And that was the last we saw of him here because he no-showed the Impact Lucha Underground show later in the night. Don't know why. And guess what? Don't really care. Don't really care. So the people that did show up, we got an impromptu triple threat match. We got to see the competitors I wanted to see in the match. So at the Impact Lucha Underground show, it would be Austin Aries versus Pentagon Jr. versus Rey Fenix, in which Pentagon Jr. would pick up the victory. Needing a new main event for Redemption because, oh yeah, Alberto's out of there, like I said, and is fired from the company. Aries wants a bit of redemption of his own and issues a rematch to both men at this pay-per-view, but this time around, his Impact World title would be on the line. This is also around the time period where Aries is the belt collector, and I did think about telling you what all the titles he was holding, but a lot of them are for companies that are titles that don't exist or for companies that do not exist. So I always like the belt collector gimmick a little bit, especially when they start losing it, because you're like, oh, is he going to lose this one, etc. I guess they here, because Mercedes Moné kind of has that thing going on right now as well. So Kenny Omega had it. Eddie Kingston had it when he was the Triple Crown champion. There's probably more. Ultimo Dragon, one of the originators of it. There's a lot of people I could have suggested. But right now, we need to talk about this Impact World title triple threat match. Austin Aries defending his title against Pentagon Jr. and Rey Fenix. Aries tries to take on both Lucha Bros early, but quickly docks out of the ring, so they battle each other. Fenix hits a cutter on Penta with Aries setting up the last chancery with Fenix breaking it up. This actually happens twice. Fenix sends Aries over the top rope and where Penta hits him with a Hurricane Rana. This is followed by Fenix doing a dive to both men on the outside. Penta and Fenix battle in the ring, including a Pentagon super kick and a Fenix driver. Penta hits the Penta driver, but Aries breaks up the pin. Penta hits Fenix with another super kick on the outside. And then this right here, I don't really know what the hell happened. Aries dives to the outside onto Penta, and he kind of slips, and we don't know if Penta's supposed to be hit with it, but because Aries slips, Penta catches him. And so they're changing up the spot, and they go brawl into the crowd, in which Penta brawls into the crowd, and then Aries avoids him and leaves him. So, bit of a weird spot. Just going to move on from it right now because they ended up doing it. Aries hits a 450 splash onto both men back on the ring, and then both men get him back with double super kicks and do it twice as well. Penta follows this up with the Gory Driver and Fear Factor onto both men, then hits the Sacrifice Arm Breaker on Aries and ends the match with a Penta Driver on Aries as well, and becomes the new Impact World Champion. Penta, one of the most loved wrestlers in the world right now, has always kind of been that, quickly having this Impact title reign, because while he would technically hold it, I also love that Fenix has won this match almost every time we've done it. Even though in reality Penta was technically champion for a month, it was really for 2 days because of the way the tapings were and whatnot. But it was a nice shock ending because you didn't really expect Penta to become the world champion. He was never really signed to the company. He was just on a per appearance deal. But overall, it's a good start for TNA. The shows would be a lot better after this. Like I said, they would start traveling a lot more. And I want to give a shout out to Penta, Fenix, Brian Cage, and LAX. And Eddie Edwards. Those are the main guys that I was tuning into to watch Impact around this time period, because I was able to start watching Impact again because soon after they would start streaming the show on Twitch. And before that, they were even archiving it on the Global Wrestling Network, which is now known as Impact Plus, which they still do that to this day. So overall, this is a good show, a good redeeming show, and it was set the foundation of TNA and this era thereafter. So I enjoyed the show. I'm glad. Also, if you I probably should have said this in the beginning. I knew I'd forget, but if you wanted to like see it with your own eyes, this was on YouTube, which is one of the main factors in me choosing this show to the review, because I was going back and forth on did I want to watch this or did I want to watch Lockdown 2008, which has Kurt Angle and Samoa Joe. Then I came to the realization that that show is not free on YouTube. So grand scheme of things, I wanted to review this show from the start, and I'm moments away from it being done and this review being done. I'm hoping that I do not burp before that happens. So overall, like I said, I enjoyed the show, and it was just a nice foundation piece for Impact and their shows and years, really, that would follow after. So the next retro review, we should be starting our series of WrestleMania reviews. And I will admit to y'all, because I've admitted that this week or the last couple, I don't know what show I'm reviewing yet. I would prefer it to be a older WrestleMania. I've been going back and forth on which one it should be. I think the leading candidate right now is WrestleMania 3. But to be honest, that could change. So we should start our month of WrestleMania reviews on the next retro review. I might also have another review of something else up, but I'm not going to tell y'all what that is in case I don't get to do it or get around to it. So the next review should be a WrestleMania review, but who knows? These are very TBD and in the wrestling sakes card subject to change. So I've been talking for a long time and the review's really done, so I'm just trying to talk even longer than I don't have to. So I do appreciate y'all for watching this, though. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, you could leave a like. Comment what you want to see on the retro review series, and it may or may not happen. And I'll see y'all when y'all see. I will see y'all when I see y'all, because I'm out for now. Goodbye.